So we have finally gotten some Paladin changes for the good. In particular, the Paladin Justicar. They made some recent changes that were sorely lacking with regards to any real substance that would have made much change. They introduced 100 magnitude damage over time to intimidating presence, and then just increased the magnitude on Radiant Slam and a little bit of the cast time, and otherwise making Aura of Vengeance actually critically hit. And that was it. Just those three things were improvements. The biggest thing was the big nerf to the action point regeneration through your block. You're ending up with only getting a daily power every 40 seconds versus 20 seconds as before. There was nothing really to compensate for that. No buffs to threat or survivability or any of that. Well, we have some good news. They actually are coming out with some additional updates, and they have pushed them to the preview already for testing. As per Brett Norton's post right here, they're changing up the threat values on tank powers. This is not just for the Paladin, this is also going for the Sentinel and the Fighter. And I'll cover those later and how they impact what powers you want to be choosing. But for Paladin specifically, the changes look like this in terms of the threat values and their percentages. So if anybody's really unfamiliar how threat works, is basically the more damage you deal, the higher threat you have. So whoever's done the most damage is the person getting attacked. It's just certain powers and ability have increased threat, and that means those powers basically deal more damage to the enemy. They think you deal more damage than you actually deal. And that's like a multiplier. So this power would multiply all your damage by 5.5. So if I dealt 10 damage, the enemy would actually think I dealt 55 damage instead. And that's how you could keep up with the damage dealer and be on top of the threat with all these abilities, even though you're doing a fraction of their damage. So these changes come with the adjustments to those modifiers. So before, Oath of Protection was 5.5 or 550%. It is now getting a massive increase to 1,500%. That is huge. That's nearly triple. However, that comes with the massive reduction of a lot of other abilities. Oath Strike going down to 300%, Templars down to 300, Aura of Valor actually getting buffed, reducing the enemy's threat of minus 15% rather than just 5. Sacred Shield feat going from 400 to 300%, Intimidating Presence feat getting actually just switched. It's going from 130% multiplicative threat to plus 500% base threat, meaning you're gaining overall 33.33% threat through this ability, but it's not that much of a gain versus what it was before, other than the extra 100 magnitude hit, which we'll cover a little bit later. Divine Reciprocation feat, I am still not sure on that. I haven't done any testing on it, but there is a dev note that it's currently generating more threat than it should and will be reviewed. And otherwise, threat gear bonuses like Divine Word from the Dark Maiden's headpiece, or Dashing Decoy from the Diamond Pin set, or Teamwork Tactics from the Northern Jewel set. All those bonuses, which were like plus 25%, plus 10%, plus 15%, are being reworked to now be plus 100% to your base threat. Your base threat being that Aura of Protection. So you basically add 100, that'll be 1,600 then instead of 1,500, which results in an overall gain of 6.66% additional overall threat. So it'll be diminished the more you have of these other abilities. They'll help, but not by a whole lot. But what does this really mean then for, let's say, the damage of your powers, the effective damage? Especially since Templar's getting that massive nerf, Oath Strike as well. All that increased threat has gone down drastically from 800% to 300%. Is that a nerf? What is happening? Well, we're going to look at these changes in terms of magnitude. So let's say these increased threat modifiers, we just multiply the magnitude of the power by that, and we can see how much effective damage it would deal then after we multiply it by our stats with that magnitude. So you would see that Oath Strike before was 1,100 magnitude. Now with this change, it's going to be 1,125, because you're going from this formula here, 550% times 800%, to 1,500% times 300%. So it's actually a little bit of a buff. But where you see this buff really matter is when you look at Shielding Strike, which doesn't have that increased threat. Before it was only 330 magnitude, now it's 900 magnitude. That is not that bad compared to Oath Strike, meaning it's a ton more viable to run Shielding Strike all the time versus Oath Strike and still maintain pretty good threat. The only time you would need to really switch to Oath Strike is if you're really struggling with threat. Now we can use Shielding Strike and get the extra stamina regen. That is huge. Love that. Templar's Wrath. This before was 17,600 magnitude, getting a teeny bit of a buff up to 18,000. That's similar to what we see with the difference in Oath Strike. So again, it is a little bit of an increase. Smite. Massive buff, because again, it didn't have increased threat on it, so its damage now being multiplied massively by our overall base threat of 1,500 has gone from just over 6,000 magnitude to just over 17,000 magnitude. Again, keep in mind this is at full divinity. The more divinity you use, the less magnitude this power will have, and thus the damage of it will decrease, and so the threat. So still not that great, just spam smite to hold threat. You'd be better off more reliably with Templar's Wrath. But just be aware that smite is a little bit cheaper on the divinity cost. I'm going to do some testing with regards to the scaling of the damage reduction on that, but it could be very viable now to go smite instead of Templar's Wrath and still be pretty good on threat, because look at that damage difference. Absolutely huge. The magnitude difference compared to what it was before to what it is now. Bane, similar, except it's still only maximum like 9,300 magnitude. Compare that to Templar's Wrath, which is nearly double that. It's still no way good in area of effect fights to use Bane versus Templars. With Sacred Weapon, it actually got a pretty big buff. Excuse my table earlier and what will be shown ahead of this clip, as this is supposed to edit, but I had a mistake there that this was 800%. It actually was only 400%. So this is a significant increase in the effectiveness of Sacred Weapon, making it a lot more viable to use for threat. But we move on. Binding Oath, you see a pretty massive increase to that. So that's the hit whenever you get attacked, you deal damage back to your attacker. This increase to our base threat massively boosts this up to 975 magnitude effectively. Same with Aura Vengeance, gone from 55 magnitude up to 150. Now additionally, that Intimidating Presence. It's got one change to it, which just happened recently, is adding 100 magnitude damage over time. So every second you're in combat, you'll deal 100 magnitude to everybody within 30 feet. So anybody within that bubble, when we go to flat area, what happened here? I got locked out of here, huh? When we look here, you can see that circle. Any enemy within the circle will take 100 magnitude damage, and you get to look like these wings. But the change to this power means that before you were dealing like 5,720 magnitude per second, now it's 6,000. So not much of a difference there. It's just that extra magnitude hit is a new addition coming with Module 27. Before that, all it was doing was increasing your threat by that 30%, 130%. Now it's gaining a plus 500% instead, which is adding to your base. So that'll be 2,000 now instead of 1,500. But that only results in a plus 2.5% overall gain threat generated. So it's not going to be a big deal. But what is a big deal is that 6,000 magnitude per second. That is really nice. It definitely makes this power pretty competitive to use as threat. You could use it totally with combination of smite, just have that threat over time, and a bit of smite to get you back on top of the threat list and to deal high damage at the start. I just think the more reliable and the more safe option will still be Unyielding Champion to get that block up to 60%. So you're basically gaining a 20% additional hit points, and then just going Templar's Wrath for the burst in the artifact calls for the threat. But again, I still want to compare that with smite and how much does smite diminish as you lose your divinity. Since it is still a little bit less of a cost, and you can use a feature to also make it a hard taunt, freeing up a, let's say, encounter stunt that you might use for Vow instead, giving you the ability to even use then Sacred Weapon for added burst threat, and so on. I'm going to have to do some more testing on this. It'll be interesting. We'll run the new trial soon when that comes on preview. Still no news of when though, but yeah. pretty happy with these additional changes to the Paladin tank. It's something we needed. Of course, there's a multitude of different things that they could add as well, but this is at least a step in the right direction. They've basically made it so that our damaging powers that didn't have, let's say, increased threat will now deal a lot more effective damage to the enemy, meaning they become a lot more viable. Again, just have a look at all those changes with the before and after in terms of the magnitude. Shielding Strike up to 900 from just 300. Bane from 3,400 to 9,000. Binding Oath from 350 to nearly 1,000. These changes have similarly impacted the Fighter and the Sentinel, and I'll probably cover these again for them. They also have some other additional changes coming as well to certain powers and abilities on top of what you may have seen already. With that said, a special thank you to all these channel members for their added support. We'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.